Well, good evening and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
My name is Adam, the first human being created. Some may ask, why did God create man? It comes down to this. God is love. We have a God that is so full of love that he did not just wish to keep it within himself, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. He wished to create something like himself, but outside of himself, so that he could express love. I was the first human being to experience the pure love of God. There was no sin in the world at the time. We had these talks and conversations that I just relished and enjoyed. You can't have a better talk with someone like God. Maybe you have your conversations with God now when you call prayer. But before sin entered the world, can you imagine talking to God face to face like I did? It was something I relished every day. God would walk in the garden, and I'd hear his word, and I would go and run to it. Say, God, what's going on today? I want to share with you my life. I want to share with you my stories. God would listen. I would listen to him. The conversations with God was just awesome. But as you know, things have changed, right? The conversations you have with God in your prayer are a lot more distant than the ones I had with God before I rebelled against him. I brought a dark Paul into this world when I rebelled against my Creator. I introduced into this world sin and death. You all died because of me. I was the one that introduced not just sin, but death into this world. How did it all happen? If you know your story that was written by Moses in Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3, God had created a perfect world for us. I enjoyed those conversations with God, but there was something else I enjoyed day to day. I enjoyed getting up in the morning and going to work. Every day. I didn't have this boss that was an ogre. I didn't have stress associated with work that you have today. I loved work. As a matter of fact, that was another reason why I was created. I was created to receive God's love. And I was created to work the garden. Every day, I enjoyed work. God out of love created me, and God also saw that I needed something more. It's not good for man to be alone. And to help me understand that, he brought all the animals to me and see what I would name them. But you know what I was noticing when I was looking at the animals? There was male and female. Where was my female? God knew what he was doing. He's making me aware that my emptiness in life was due because I did not have the female. God put me into a deep sleep, took a rib out of my side, and made a woman. We named her Eve. She was the mother of all the living. God was taking care of me. But I was not, unfortunately, being faithful to God. Eve was a great gift. We had a beautiful relationship. But I messed that up. I told Eve that there was a tree in the Garden of Eden. It was the knowledge of good and evil. God said, if I were to ever eat of that tree, I would surely die. Now, we hadn't seen or witnessed death in our world because there was none, but it sure didn't sound good. It's definitely something we knew we needed to avoid. And Eve, she said something to me that made a lot of sense, but back then I thought, no, She said, if this tree could cause such problems in our life and introduce something called death, why don't we just cut it down? Why leave it here? And I said, oh, I don't know, Eve. You know, it's there, and maybe it can come to some good use down the road. So don't touch it, don't harm it. And that is where the mess began. We are told through Moses, the devil said to Eve, the day you eat of this tree, you shall be like God. But Eve said, no, we're not to eat of this tree, nor are we to touch it. If we do, we shall surely die. God never said anything about touching the tree. That was my addition. And that's where the devil took advantage of my extra words. He pushed her up against the tree and said, you shall not die. See, you're touching the tree. Where's death? So will God carry out the rest of the threat? Eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And I failed. I failed by not communicating the right words to Eve. And I failed because I was not standing guard for the truth. Eve ate. Then she handed it to me. Now I had a choice. It was a tough choice, right? I could stay away from eating of that knowledge of good and evil and remain intimate with my God, whose conversations I enjoyed every day. But I had this woman now. She had fallen into sin. Should I fall into sin with her and distance myself from God? Or should I stay obedient to my God and distance myself from my wife? Eve was deceived. I went into sin willingly, knowingly, and conscientiously. I knew what I was doing. Now, because I fell into sin, we have a mess in this world. We all die. There are problems in our life where we wonder who we are. We're wondering if we're ever going to get anywhere in this world. We have a sense that we should be better than what we are. We experience guilt for our shortcomings. All these emotions that you have that put you into darkness and despair are there because of me. I brought a dark pall into this world that still exists for many of us today. So the next conversation I had with God was not going to be pleasant. I heard God's voice walking in the garden again, and I hid myself because I knew that I was in trouble. I was ashamed to see God. I didn't want to look at his face because I was introducing something into his life that I didn't want to see. His wrath, his anger, for not listening to him. Before rebellion, I would always look God in the face. I always enjoyed seeing him in the face. He would lift his countenance up to me, and he would smile upon me, and show his favor upon me. But now, I brought an angry countenance on the face of God. And he asked that question. Adam, where are you? Because I tried to hide myself because of shame. Now people will say, well, God's all-knowing, right? Surely he knew where Adam was. You see, that's not the point of the question. The point of the question was to hammer me, to make me answer the question. God already knew the answer. And it wasn't a question of geography, like, where was I in the Garden of Eden? He knew where I was. He was asking me this question. Adam, where are you now in relationship to me? Pretty far away from you, God. Pretty far away. I have distanced myself greatly. And because of that, I'm ashamed. Even I tried to hide. But he was going to make us face reality. He was going to make us face our sin and the penalties. You always want to try to play the blame game. I really didn't blame Eve to begin with. I really blamed God. I said, this happened because of the woman you gave me. You made her a sinner. But that's all wrong. Eve chose to be a sinner. I chose to be a sinner. You can't go around and blame God for being the sinful people we are. That's kind of like saying that God made Cain a murderer. He had no choice. He wasn't responsible or accountable for his action. Not true. Cain chose to be a murderer. God did not make him a murderer. That dark pall that came upon us that night affected everything in our relationship between Eve and myself, creation, my relationship with God, and my work. I didn't want to go to work every day anymore because God cursed the ground. Every day I went to work, it was always producing fruits and great things. But now God said, thorns and thistles is going to produce for you. And by the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread. Now there was anxiety associated with work. There was tension. There was unhappiness. I didn't want to go to work every day anymore because it was a penalty for my sin. So you might really end up saying this, that I'm the reason for the season. Wait a minute, what do you mean? Adam, you're the reason for the season. Think about it. Just think about it. God was visiting man all the time. We had this open relationship till I closed it because of sin. And if I wouldn't have sinned, there would have been no need for the visitation of Christ. There'd be no need to be celebrating Christmas. There'd be no need for Jesus to become incarnate like me. In the flesh, body and soul, with blood. There would be no need. Because of the fall, there was a need. The first Adam, the reason for the season. But enough about me. Let's talk tonight about the second Adam. The second Adam that St. Paul, the apostle, talks a lot about in Romans and Corinthians. Paul tells us that by one man's disobedience, death came into the world, but by one man's obedience, life comes into the world. The first Adam became a living soul. The second Adam from heaven became a life-giving spirit. How did he become a life-giving spirit? Because he came to visit us for the purpose of redeeming us. He just didn't come to visit us to talk to us. We had that before I messed up. He came not just to visit, but to redeem. Jesus, through the death and resurrection, is what makes Christmas important for the Christian. It tells us that the second Adam is the reason for the season. This is why Jesus has come, to redeem us. You know, you see foreshadowing of the sacrifice of the second Adam, even in the fall. We had fallen into sin, Adam and Eve, myself, my wife, we were ashamed, and we hid ourselves, and we tried to even cover ourselves with fig leaves, but they weren't good enough. God had to cover us, because we couldn't do it ourselves. That's just exactly what we see with the second Adam of Christ. If we could have saved ourselves, we wouldn't need Christmas. We couldn't. Christmas tells us we cannot save ourselves. God has to do it for us. And there's a little bit of symbolism in this whole aspect of this fur that God made for Adam and Eve, for me and you. We could not cover ourselves, so that God had to cover us. But in order for us to be covered with animal fur, guess what? Something had to die. An animal. Through the death of an animal, we receive covering to hide our shame. It was a foreshadow of the second Adam's sacrifice. Jesus Christ dies for us so that we might be covered with his righteousness. St. Paul again comes to mind when he tells me these words. Those who have been baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. You see it? You see how the symbolism of the fur in Genesis chapter 3 is foreshadowing of the righteousness you receive in your baptism? And because you receive the clothing of Christ, you're going to be having those conversations with God again. Those conversations I had. You're going to be able to see him face to face. You're going to enjoy the bliss of life the way it was created to live in the presence of God. And have those conversations with him that I did before I messed it up. Christmas is a story of a promise. We're going to be talking to God again in a way that I did before I messed it up. And in those conversations with God, we'll find ourselves experiencing total happiness and bliss, not just for momentary time, but for eternity. God created me out of love. He sent his Son out of love so that we could experience his love for eternity. Jesus, the second Adam, the reason for the season. Think and hold on to those promises as you celebrate the birth of Jesus this evening. In his name.